Hey YouTube fan, this is Professor Green coming with another live segment of Color of Truth, where we reveal the color of all truth. Continuing my conversation, part 2 of my aunt Alzada, born between 1930s and the 1950s. 40s. Talking about, we stopped last night with the conversation using the real live experience about how the South was, how it was growing up in Garfield, Georgia, then moving to Glenville, Georgia, then to Savannah, Georgia, and eventually to New York. And so sharing a little bit about information about her history, her background in the Deep South. So we stopped off, Auntie, and you want to talk about the rich black man in Glenville, Georgia.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
The rich black man, he was from the north, but it was said that he was working for some white man. But all I know that we lived on his place, and he enjoyed my daddy's company, and he would come and get my daddy. He would visit us, and in the country. Well, he was living in the country, and he would have conversations with my daddy on the porch.
Now, what year was this, Auntie? Right? What year would you think this was about? How old were you during this time?
Oh Lord, I can't think right now. But that was before 14. Well, maybe I was 11 or 12, maybe 11 or 12, maybe 12 or 13.
So you talk about around 1940 something. Okay, all right.
So he would come to our house and sit on the porch just like a regular person. And then he often come and get my daddy to go ride with him to another city, another country town.
And why this is important, because you classify him as being rich.
Yeah.
And during that time, it may have not been believed that black people or people of African descent had riches and wealth during that time. So I just want to make sure I point that out to the family, that not all people of color or not all black people during that time, even after enslavement or after post-emancipation, were poor.
Right, because he wouldn't invite us in to eat at that table. When we were grinding cane. And I remember all of us sitting at that table eating with them.
Okay.
With his wife. And then we would go home. Now it was said that he was working for a rich white man. But we didn't ever see this white man. Sometimes white people would come and walk around the place with him occasionally. But he was just like, he was owning, he had a big house, and he would they were very nice to us. He was very nice to us.
Okay.
And he had a big tomato plant. I remember that, where you pull the tomato plants at a certain point, and they were put on a conveyor belt, and you wrap paper around them and tie them up.
Okay.
And that was kind of fun, but it was a job.
It was a job, yeah. And during this time, this still is in Glenville, Georgia.
That's in Glenville, Georgia.
So it was segregation going on. So during that time, you did see the white-only water fountains.
Oh, yes.
The colored-only water fountains, the restrooms.
Colored restroom. And there was one store downtown. Now I'm talking about when I was near high school age. I was like 16 and 15, 16, 17. There was one store that maybe I shouldn't call his name, Mr. Lane. He's not alive now. Mr. Lane worked in that store. One black man worked in that store, and he waited on black people.
Okay.
It was a clothing store, and he would allow us to use credit there.
Okay.
Because at that time I was in high school then, and I wanted, clothes, and I didn't want to wear one piece 2 times,
Right.
So we'd go there and get a little credit from Mr. Lane. He was a deacon in the church. And so after that, after graduating from high school, and I was the valedictorian when I graduated.
Go ahead, Auntie.
And I...
So you mean to tell me they had valedictorians during that time?
And salutatorians.
And salutatorians. During the time where they would think that black people would not be those things.
Right. But we were attending an all-black school.
Right.
But, and I was so afraid that I didn't want to take it, but they knew. As a matter of fact, when I was in high school, I used to substitute teach, not being paid for it, but they would have me take, as the classes come and go, and then they have a teacher, they would have me just sit at the, I pretend to be, I was like the substitute teacher.
Okay.
And when my class come in, we wouldn't do any work. But the other class, if they got disorderly, I would put their name on paper, take their names, and even people that maybe had dropped out of high school, sometimes they would have them come in and substitute if the teacher was out.
Okay.
But then, my sisters and brothers were rebelling quite a bit on the farm, and the white man thought, my daddy, he said, with your children, you should be picking a bale of cotton a day. Yes. And I do remember picking 200 pounds of cotton 2 times.
Lord have mercy.
My mother said, baby, you can do it. I believe you can do it.
That was your nickname, Baby.
Yes, they called me Baby. And I was the baby girl, but they all called me Baby. And when I was grown, your grandmother used to call me Baby too.
Do you remember cotton, like splitting your fingers or pricking your fingers, causing them to bleed?
But the way you put your fingers in there, I'm sure it did. I don't recall that. But I certainly know how you put your finger in there to pull that cotton out.
Yeah. Probably became something that was normal anyway.
And you had to do 4 full sacks in the morning and 4 full sacks in the afternoon. You have 200 pounds of cotton.
Wow. Now, when I went to Louisiana to the Whitney plantation, they say that people came out and worked from what you call cant to cant. So from can't see to can't see. Was that your experience, or what did y'all? Oh no, because you said in the part 1, you said that your father would make you all stop.
Yeah.
At a certain time.
When the sun got too hot. That was your great granddaddy.
Great grandfather, right?
And when the sun's too hot, he'll say, "Let's go in.
Let's go in for the day.
Let's knock off."
Yeah.
And then it go back maybe after 1, after 2 o'clock. See, that's why the man thought we weren't working hard enough, because he said, with your group of children, you should be picking 2 bales of cotton in 1 or 2 days.
Wow.
But my daddy didn't push us like that.
Right.
And oftentimes, I would carry the water around to people. I explained that yesterday.
Right.
I was like the water girl.
Yeah, because using Robert Smith's genealogy, I trace everything back to 1870, where I think that his father would have been on the plantation. But we can get into that in another segment. So you transition from Glenville to
Savannah. We moved here. I came with my father. Well, I came to Savannah on the bus and stayed with my aunt until my parents moved, and we bought a house in Carver Village. Now, before we left Savannah, my mother had a stroke. She was working in the morning, and she fell in the floor. And my mother was like 200 pounds, a little more. And we just almost had a fit, when my mother fell. and her speech was different. At that time, her mind was different. She couldn't remember things. So I had a very smart mother.
Right.
She could spell any word. And in high school, we would ask her, Mama, how to spell significant or any words, and she would tell us.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
So that means that a lot that people even post emancipation were not all illiterate.
That's right. My daddy was illiterate, but
Okay.
he had a mind. He could count. He could count mentally. He could compute in his head as fast as I could on paper.
Wow.
With pen and paper. So, and they all, even from there, they thought, my daddy used to say, my baby's going to be a teacher.
Oh.
And that's what I wanted to be.
So he spoke it into existence in your life.
Yes. And that's when I just, I said, I'm going to leave this country, leave the farm. One day I'm not going to be out here in this field. And I used to just chop cotton and work and just sweat and just keep working. And you have your jar cold water out in the field. Because we didn't have lights, but then my daddy had a generator light on the porch. It looked like he had lights.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Could you imagine that family living without lights and cable TV today?
Oh, yeah. And then, too, we had studied by lamplight.
By lamp, right.
Yeah.
And you also, we was talking when we was at the Richardsons, just talking, having Bible study the other night. They started talking about, and family, we was around some individuals. I got to get all of them on video if they would allow me. One lady was 93, 94.
She was 94, yes.
Yeah, and this couple's house we were to, they were in their late 70s. Wife
Larry
had just turned.
is 80.
Yeah, Larry is 80, and then Mrs. Richardson is. Yeah, she is 70. 70 what?
77.
Yeah, and then
The husband is older.
Yeah,
So
and the
he's
husband's
80.
mother is 106.
Yes.
So they begin to talk about the washboards and.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, I didn't even mention that.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, the washboards, we had a black pot. In almost every yard there was a black pot where you had coals around it because you had wood around it, and you like that. And I don't know why we boiled the clothes, because they had to be white. White clothes were boiled, and we take it out, and sometimes you beat them, and then you would, iron the clothes, take them in and iron, hang them on a line, and they would dry, and you would take them in and iron them. My mother didn't take in washes from the white people. Because see, my daddy, as I said before, my daddy didn't really want my mother to work. He wanted her to stay home and cook. So now after we moved to Savannah, Georgia, while we were there, when we were boiling the clothes in the pot, we had a rub board, 10 tubs and a rub board. And something very important.
Right.
We didn't have a bathtub. We had an outhouse.
Right.
And everybody washed in not the same water. You pour the water out. And we didn't have bathcloths, we had rags.
Rags, okay.
And so you wash, but you didn't wash and I can't even imagine this today. We worked in the field, we got dirty, but guess what? We didn't take a bath every night.
Right, didn't take none every night, yeah. Probably to conserve water too.
I don't know, because we had a well.
You had a well. Okay.
We had a well, so water was no problem.
Right. And what do y'all use? What did you all use during that time for soap? Did you use soap?
My mother made soap.
Oh, she made it. Wow, that's.
And then flour came in flour sacks. And as I said before, my daddy made quilting frames, and my mother we used to quilt.
Which you still do today.
Which I started quilting. I'm a quilter today.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's my craft now. And we used to sit out on the porch and just sing, and my daddy played 7 instruments.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, my daddy played 7 instruments.
Do you know any of those instruments? What were the instruments?
No. Do I know them? Yes.
Yeah, what it was?
The harmonica.
Harmonica.
Guitar. The piano. The organ. And what else? I said harmonica.
Right.
I can't think of the last 2.
Guitar, piano.
He was musically inclined. He could sing. My daddy could sing. Yeah. I can't remember the other 2. But when it comes to music, my daddy was really gifted.
So you transitioned from Glenville. You saw a lot of the bigotry and the racism that was involved.
Now in Savannah, I don't, because I think I was in Savannah about a year, and I didn't. My mind was not good. Friends would come by and borrow something, and my mother wouldn't remember who it was.
Right.
Or what they borrowed. That's in the hairline. Because remember, your Aunt Maddie used to do hair.
No, I didn't know that about her.
In Glenville, Maddie used to do hair.
Okay.
And then once, and guess what? It was like $2 to do a person's hair. Wash it, straighten it, and curl it.
Okay.
And then once, they came to the house and asked for my sister. She wasn't at home. And they said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes."
Okay.
And I did that.
So you would get that money.
$2.
That's a lot during that time.
Yes, it was.
You're talking about maybe a period of when you got.
Stamps were like 2 cents.
So you're talking about the period about what, 1950, something like that?
Oh yes, before 1950.
Before 1950.
Because I think we moved to Savannah in 54.
Oh, 54. Okay.
1954.
Okay.
And I left out the part where I had a baby.
Okay, you can talk about that if you feel like talking about it. It's your show.
I don't know if I feel like. Well, I fell in love with this young man I was 16, 17. And I fell in love with him. I was in high school. And at that time, they were beginning to teach sex education in the schools. But one teacher said, "Don't do it." And one teacher said, "You do it, but you use protection."
Right.
So I just thought I was head over heels in love with him.
Right.
And this was in Glenville before I graduated.
So that's still in the 40s.
This is we're working on in the 50s now.
Working on in the 50s. Okay.
Because my son was born in 53.
Okay.
And I fell in love with him and did a silly thing. You know, had sex with him and got pregnant.
Okay.
And of course, he tried to say it was some man on the next farm. And he just ignored me. I was so hurt that I said, "You know what?" My brothers used to say, none of the other girls, they married and they didn't disgrace the family. And I felt so bad. Talking about working in the fields, I worked. Pregnant, I worked. And I said, I'm going to make my family proud.
Right.
I was determined to make my family proud. I'm going to make something of myself. I made a mistake, but I'm going to rectify that by making my family proud of me.
Yeah.
My mom and my daddy, and I had never worked that hard in my life.
Wow.
I was just determined to work as hard as I could to help my parents, because they had helped me. And my daddy, thank God, he says, you don't have to get married. We'll get through this. And it hurts me to talk about that today.
Okay.
But I just thank God, because people knew that my daddy said I was going to be a teacher. My mother always instilled in me, get an education, baby.
Right.
Get an education, baby.
Right.
And my mother, as I said, she could read and write. And she only went to like 2nd grade in school.
Right.
So when I moved to Savannah, I said to my mother and I said to my father, well, because college was not explained how you put in your application, how much money you had to have. And I wrote my brother and I said, I want to go to college, but there's no money. And can you help me? I just wanted the education, because I just wanted to be the teacher. I just wanted, it was the worst thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the worst way. So when I went to Savannah, I said, well, Mama and Daddy, I can't get in school, so maybe I'll be a beautician. So I had to do something. I had to be something.
Right.
So then, but that, I didn't get started with being a beautician. So I met a young man who was 12 years older than I. My aunt introduced me to him. And when he asked me to marry him, I told him I'm going to school when I get married.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm going to be a teacher.
Right.
Yes. But I always felt that, the guys couldn't take me to the little corner clubs. I wanted to go to the nicer clubs in Savannah.
That's right. That's
and the nicer restaurants. I wouldn't allow them to just take me anywhere.
Right, right.
So,
and I'd like to touch on something you said. I think your father was full of compassion with you, because he didn't worry about what was the status quo.
Right.
That women, would disgrace the family by getting pregnant. During that time, I'm quite sure it was this thing about, you disgrace the family.
Yeah, a few other people.
And people would say, well, abstinence during that time, right? And not, hey, you made a mistake. I still love you. We gonna get through this. I heard you say that about your father, and I think that was significant, that he didn't worry about what people thought during that time.
Yes.
That he still supported you through that. Because a lot of people would even put the family members, the daughter out of the house during that time.
Right. And see, my sister had married the brothers. See, we were dating 2 brothers.
Right.
And then my sister came back home because they...
You talking about Aunt Maddie?
Yes.
Okay.
That marriage didn't last. And so she had a child, but it died.
Right. I always heard that story. That's stillborn child, right?
Yeah. No. He lived about maybe 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay.
But he had I don't know the significant name for it, but he had a big head, and just kept being bigger. Hydrocephalus, something, I can't remember the name. But it was where the water was on the brain, and he would just holler and holler and holler.
Oh, God.
And it came to a time where she had to feed him out a teaspoon. And there was one time when I stayed overnight in the hospital. And being the youngest one, that's right, there was some kind of hospital there in Glenville. I don't remember. And that was in Ludwig, Georgia.
Oh, okay. So talk about your experience in Savannah first. Now, you came in Savannah. The guys were you made sure the guys took you to a nice restaurant.
Oh yeah.
What was the climate in Savannah? Because I know it was still, because during that time you still had segregated lunch counters.
But you know,
I don't quite.
For some reason, I can't remember what was what, because I always went to the black clubs.
Oh, okay.
Shingle Lock, they had a little awning coming out, but it was nice.
Yeah.
Shingle Lock, I think.
Was it in certain stores downtown? Because I know when I talked to...
Yes, but I don't remember. I know we couldn't sit at Woolworths.
Right.
At the counters.
Right, couldn't sit at Woolworths. Couldn't go on the beach. Tidy.
Right. But I can't remember. I can't remember if they still had, and I'm sure they had colored water fountain and colored bathroom, but I don't remember those.
Okay. Maybe because you hung out in the segregated black social spots. Maybe.
Yes, I did. But the nice one, my sisters went to little dinky clubs, but I wouldn't go.
Right.
I wouldn't have
allowed. You went to
them.
the more upscale. Did you ever go to Mutuals?
What's Mutuals?
Mutuals was on Bonnet Street.
I don't recall the Mutuals.
Our former mayor, Oda Johnson, talked about Mutuals being where all the prominent, affluent doctors and
I didn't go. I wasn't that
nurses, and they went to Mutual, which is what first was a mutual aid spot, and then it turned to a club. And when I was coming up, it was a club, but a lot of it started. The younger generation started attending, but at first it was a mutual aid spot where people went out to help the community. Well, maybe I'll do a segment on that.
Well, I was not in that circle.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Okay. And then too, I remember going to the movies. I had to sit upstairs. And
that's where all the blacks sat up?
Blacks sat upstairs, the Dunbar.
Oh.
And the Star Theater.
That was, the Star Theater was on...
West Broad Street.
West Broad, yeah.
And I think the Dunbar was on the east side.
Is that the one on the corner of East and Gwinnett?
I think so.
The building is still there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do remember that, but I remember going downtown, but I don't remember, say, not being able to sit at the Woolworth. But I know we couldn't do it in those days.
Mm-hmm. And if you're out there and you're from Savannah, and I'm saying the wrong spots for the Dunbar and the Star, drop it in the comment. Let me know what area those theaters were actually in, so that we can have proper clarification. But I think that I always was told that Star Theater was on the corner of East Broad and Gwinnett.
Okay.
That's before my time, though.
East Broad and Gwinnett.
Right.
East Broad. I have no idea the location.
Right, I understand. That's okay.
Okay, so
you're in Savannah, you go into upscale.
Right, I worked
social spots.
Star's Laundry. I did a little housework, but then I never liked cleaning houses and cleaning people's houses. I thought it reminds me of out in the country.
Right.
Well, I didn't clean the house, but we used to go. I forgot to tell you that we used to go and wash the dishes for the white woman. Clean up the kitchen. And she would give us iced tea and pound cake. I don't know if she ever paid us, but I know we get that iced tea and pound cake. So, but anyway, my boyfriend at that time, my first husband, he left and went to New York, and then he sent for me. And there I took typing and shorthand, after I had 2 children then, but my parents always kept my children.
Okay.
Yeah, they always kept me.
So they helped out a lot. They were very supportive.
Yes. And my first husband was supportive of me going to school. Because he would leave the car where I could get the car and drive.
Which is important, because during that time, men would frown upon
Educate. That's true.
women getting education in a more male-dominated society.
Right. Where he had his faults, like once I was going to school, like he wouldn't go out with me. I couldn't get him to go visit people with me. He went with his old friends from Savannah.
Okay.
So we had his good and his bad.
Yeah. So we'll start right there. We ending with you transitioning from Savannah to New York.
Because
and if you can think of anything else in Savannah, we'll come at that on the next part, okay?
Okay.
So drop a comment. Let me know what you think about the discussion with my auntie. Color of Truth. Drop a comment, like, share. Thank you too for the subscribes. Thank you for joining in.